Next, we have Terry Ford.
I'm Terry Ford. I'm a senior from Basking Ridge, New Jersey, and today I'm talking about why student civic engagement matters, especially here in our hometown of State College. Good morning, everyone. My name is Terry Ford. I'm the UPUA president, and it's a great honor to be with all of you today. Today, I'm going to talk about community responsibility and the responsibility that we all have to participate in the democracy that is State College. Democracy can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, but local government matters too. And I'm here today to talk about why voting in local government elections matters and why and how local government can have a drastic impact on our lives even when we don't realize it. So by extension, I'm going to also talk about the consequences of the citizens of State College, students being the majority, not voting. So I'll warn you now, I think this speech will be grim. I think there are parts of it that will make some people feel uncomfortable because the truth is students are not voting, and that has consequences. So today, I want you to bear with me. I think some of you might totally disagree with what I have to say, but I'll tell you this. If we care about community responsibility, then this is one of those conversations that has to happen. So let's get into it. In the 2010 census, it was found that there are over 40,000 civilians living here in State College. And in State College, we're governed by a mayor and a borough council, and for the past 30 or 40 years, Democrats have won those elections handedly. And at this level here in State College, Democrat, Republican, that doesn't really matter as much. All the issues are local. But my point is, if you really want to win and become an elected official, you have to focus on the Democratic primary really more than anything else, because you're nearly guaranteed to win in the general election in November. And I say this because the Democratic primary is held in May. In May, when many thousands of students leave the area and do not vote. And for those who do stay, most of the time, they still do not vote. So in the last Democratic primary, you needed roughly 600, 700 votes to win. There are Thon committees with 600 or 700 people in them. And 600 to 700 is the number that you need to become an elected official in State College. So out of 40,000, that means that 0.01% of the population chooses our elected officials. 0.01%, and this has consequences. Here are the results from the last Democratic primary in 2015. You see 5 names, 4 of them won, and you needed a minimum of 635 votes to win that primary, and essentially the election in general. That happens because 70.6% of the population in State College is 18 to 24 years old, who nationally don't vote as often as other groups anyway, but especially here in the State College in May, in the State College community in May, when many students leave anyway. This has consequences. So today I want to talk about 6 major issues, major consequences that are the result of a lack in student civic engagement. The first one has to deal with zoning. The Borough of State College uses zoning ordinances to govern where people can live, where people can rent properties, and where commercial units can be developed. And I start out with this, and this is actually interesting because we have so many interesting topics to talk about today. We have Greek life, we have the student farm, alumni engagement, and here I am talking about zoning codes. It's a snooze fest. It's not interesting, and it illustrates why it can be so easy for students to develop apathy when it comes to their local government. It's not as exciting, but we have to break through that mentality to realize that zoning affects us in a great way. With zoning, there is a rule that if you are a student, you have to live in a student zone. We are zoned into student and non-student areas here in State College. And that's an issue by itself. We're literally segregating people based on whether or not they are enrolled in courses at Penn State. But let's go beyond that and consider what might happen if you are an individual student in State College. Let's take the example of a graduate student, for instance, who is engaged but not yet married. And I use this example because it does happen. In State College, you may not live with an unrelated person unless you live in a student zone. So for a graduate student who's probably older, who in this case at least is engaged, they don't want to live in student zones, which are designed primarily for undergraduates. They're closer to downtown, closer to fraternities. They want to live in the neighborhoods that they think will suit them well. And I think they should have a right to do that. But if you are a graduate student and you want to live with the love of your life who you're soon going to marry, you can't do that because zoning rules in State College state that two unrelated people cannot live together in the same unit unless it is a student zone. So that's an issue by itself. Another issue relates to taxes and spending here in the borough of State College. One of the reasons that it's said that we have to do all of that zoning and keep students in certain areas is because students are not the ones paying taxes. In some people's mind, only property owners in the borough of State College pay taxes, so we must zone people differently and protect property owners and long-term residents because their property values are the only ones generating any tax revenue for the borough. A member of the Borough Council relatively recently had said that we love having students in our town, but we must maintain a healthy balance between students and taxpayers, implying that there is a difference between the two. Their argument is that students don't pay taxes. This is a lie. Students pay taxes just like everybody else. We pay rent to landlords, and landlords, among their many expenses, have to pay a huge tax expense to the borough every year. A lot of that comes from your rent. Another issue, we'll keep going, is the Community Development Block Grant, CDBG, and the State College Community Land Trust. The CDBG is a grant that State College receives because we are a low-income area, according to the federal government. And we're a low-income area primarily because of the high number of low-income students who live in the borough. So in many ways, students are the ones earning, in some cases, this money for the borough. It's designed to benefit us, among others, of course. But because we're low income, we have a need. And a great deal of that money is actually being used to finance the State College Land Trust. And what this land trust does is buy up properties in the borough, sells them to qualified homeowners, which typically does not mean students, and prevents those properties from being rented out to people like students who usually rent. So, the illustration that I'm trying to draw right now is that money that is designed to support low-income people, including students, is being used to our detriment. It's something that raises questions, at least in my mind, and I wonder, why is this? Then I think about the fact that only 0.01% of the population is voting. Next, we'll talk about the PSU impact fee. Did you know that Penn State actually pays the Borough of State College roughly $500,000 a year in what they call the PSU impact fee? There's no specific reason for this fee and why it's paid, but the general idea is because the university does not pay property taxes on all of its properties in the borough, they pay this fee to offset the costs to the borough of policing and sanitation and maintaining the harm that is done by the high student population in the borough. So, if we're going to talk about PSU impact, the impact that this university has in this community, I'd like to consider it a different way. This next graph will show you the 5 largest employers in the State College area, and they're drawn to scale, so the size of each logo represents the number of employees that that firm or company has. Walmart has roughly 750 employees. The State College Area School District has roughly 1,200 employees. The Pennsylvania State Government, 1,700. Mount Nittany Medical Center, 2,200, give or take. but the biggest employer in this area by far is the Pennsylvania State University. Over 26,000 employees right here in the State College area. So if we want to talk about impact, imagine the jobs and the economic development and the tax revenue that comes from the university being right here. And if we as a community are going to accept all of those benefits, jobs, development, tax revenue, we have to consider where that money is coming from, where that development is coming from. It's coming from the university, which means it's coming from students. The university would not be here without its students. So while students may be causing ruckus here and there and causing an increase in police costs and sanitation costs, we're also the reason that there is such great economic development and job availability in this area. So you have to take the good with the bad and consider that, I think, while you're making policies. Uber. Students love Uber. I really should have used the sharing economy instead of just Uber, because this applies to Lyft and Airbnb, but the point is the same. This is something that is incredibly popular among students. And yet, there are elected officials in our community who think that the sharing economy must be regulated to a rather extreme extent. So I wonder, why is it that in a town where 70.6% of the population is 18 to 24 years old, and you have a population that loves the sharing economy, why is it that such proposals are being put forth and considered? It's because those considering those proposals were elected only by 0.01% of the population. And finally, street lighting. Basic safety for students and others. One of the biggest complaints that we receive every year in student government is that downtown State College, the Highlands neighborhood, and other areas are just too dark, and students feel unsafe traveling in their hometown. And we worked with other student groups and the Highlands Civic Association to identify some of the darkest and seemingly most dangerous spots in that neighborhood. We put forth a recommendation to the Borough Council, but it was met with overwhelming opposition. One of the members of council who was most opposed to this actually considered what might happen when you put up a light in their neighborhood. They thought that for sure, students would coalesce and swarm around the light, sort of like bugs swarm around a light and cause nuisance. Possibly, right? But you have to think, in what world, in what town in America can an elected official say that sort of thing about 70.6% of their constituency and continually get reelected every year? It's because 0.0% of the population is voting. I have two more quotes to close out today, and I'll leave you with a call to action. It's wonderful to see that we're humans and that they're humans. This is a quote from one of your elected officials after a IFC holiday light tour. This elected official participated in the tour, and this was the comment they gave afterwards. In the fall, we had the Lion Walk, which is a community event where students and long-term residents come together and meet the neighbors. And after that event, another elected official said this, and it makes you realize that students are not drunk and scary all the time. My point here today is not to attack anybody. My point here today is not to divide the community, but we must realize that if we cherish our community, and if we value community responsibility, we must know what is happening. And remember that question that I had asked you. In what town in America can an elected official say such things about their constituency, 70% of their constituency, and continually get reelected? It's because 0.01% of the population is voting. So, call to action. All of you on your desks today, on your tables, have voter registration forms. Register to vote right now. Register to vote here in State College, where you spend most of your year, and the town that you call home. Remember, the primary here is what really counts. So I know it's not always easy to change parties if you don't consider yourself a Democrat, but consider it. Consider it and consider the impact that your vote might have in that election. Request an absentee ballot. You can request an absentee ballot anytime between now and May 16th, and you can mail it in before the May 16th election day, even after you leave to go home. And finally, like I said, send it in before you leave. This is our town too for most of the year, and voting matters. As you can see, when we don't vote, when we aren't engaging our neighbors in constructive dialogue and being the democracy that we ought to be, there are problems and consequences that come from it. So like I said, pretty dark stuff, but there is a solution to it. If we cherish our democracy and do what we can do as individual citizens, it can get better. Thank you all very much.